Hey everyone, welcome back to the Chain Reaction Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Shaughnessy, a co-founder at Delphi Digital, where we're 5 full-time analysts focused on institutional crypto research. If you aren't a subscriber, you're missing out, so visit the site while you're listening. One quick housekeeping item. This podcast is strictly informational and educational and is not investment advice or solicitation to buy or sell any tokens or securities or to make any financial decisions. I may personally own tokens that are mentioned on the podcast, and you can view the show notes for our full disclosures. Side note, as the podcast has grown, we're looking for a lead sponsor. If you're interested, DM me or tweet me on Twitter for more information. With that out of the way, today I'm thrilled to have on Kurt Watkins, a partner at MG Miller Law, to discuss everything crypto from a straightforward legal perspective. We discuss Kurt's work in the crypto legal field, his thoughts on regulations, how blockchain-based LLCs can enable massively scalable businesses with low administrative costs, and why he doesn't think Facebook's Libra will even launch, and if it does, it'll look very different from what we all expect it to be. I really enjoyed this episode since Kurt's able to intertwine his deep legal experience with crypto in ways that are easy to understand for all of us non-lawyers. With that, let's jump into the episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm thrilled to have on Kurt Watkins, a partner at MG Miller Law, and he's a blockchain and technology transactions attorney. How's it going?
Well, how are you today?
Good. Thanks for coming on. Another in-person interview. This is a good change up. So Kurt, let's start with your background and how you got into the legal field, where you went to school. Give us some of your background here.
Sure. So I went to Fordham undergrad, and I went to Seton Hall Law following that. I have loved technology since I was a kid. I built my first computer when I was 13. I know my way around programming, although I would never dare to sell it. But when I went to law school, I saw this need in law for lawyers who truly understood technology, and that was always the niche that I was targeting. And then in 2016, I had heard reports about this thing called a DAO crashing. And I decided I would look into it. I followed a rabbit down a hole, and sure enough, 3 years later, heavily involved in the blockchain space, doing what I love.
That's awesome, and yeah, that definitely was not a good week when the Dow collapsed.
It was not
at all. So, just to link to the podcast and our viewing base here, give us your crypto connection. I mean, you're not you don't spend all of your time on crypto, but you also have a lot of clients in the space. Where's the overlap?
Sure. So crypto is sort of the original for me. I got involved with Ethereum, obviously, after the Dow crashed. And I followed it up as it grew and as it expanded. But as it became a more nuanced field, and it seemed to me that you really needed a securities attorney to start looking at crypto usage, where you needed a money transmitter attorney to look at sort of the money transmission issues around it. I sort of took a back seat to that and let those attorneys go there. But where I found a good niche was helping out clients with cross-border payments and using crypto as the means to facilitate it. Cross-border payments are insanely complex. The back end that makes them work, of just transferring money from your bank to a bank of maybe an independent contractor you have or a friend you have, even in England, there's an immense amount of complexity. It's like a Rube Goldberg machine, and crypto is really effective at sort of streamlining that, getting rid of some of those frictions. Ripple is obviously the most prominent one out there, but there are several others who are attacking it from all kinds of different angles. So I've been really shifted my focus toward the cross-border payments space as the field has developed.
That's awesome. And we'll definitely get more into that in a little bit. But just to set the stage for people that are like legally dumb like myself, and you alluded to it a bit just now, what are the different types of lawyers in the crypto field? I mean, I feel like a lot of the news focuses on like those that are going to litigate. But, what are the different partitions here for the crypto field within the legal field as well?
Sure. So this is actually a carryover problem from your standard technology attorneys, like even before blockchain became a big thing. And that is that because the way technology works and how it puts things together and who's involved and what they're doing, if you want to have one attorney looking at the space and understanding the space, that attorney is actually going to be familiar with a lot of areas of law. So what will happen is you'll get attorneys who sort of specialize in the industry and are familiar with the lingo and hopefully familiar with the technical aspects of it all, and then they'll take some element of their practice. So for my case, I was always a corporate and contracts attorney. So I took my legal knowledge of how corporations and how service contracts work and applied it to the crypto space. So, when we talk about like cross-border payments, it's like, okay, well, I'm not a payments attorney, but I am a contracts attorney. So in terms of setting up the contracts with companies facilitating these sort of services, I can be immensely helpful in those regards. But then, if it comes down to, okay, well, we need a legal opinion as to whether this blockchain company is producing a token that's compliant, or we should go with this other blockchain company, well, then you need to pull in a payments attorney, and I would then take a back seat. So it's a field very much still in flux, and it really depends on sort of the underlying legal background of the attorney you're talking to that will like dictate the best place to put them for your blockchain or crypto needs.
No, that makes a ton of sense. So building on your specialty here, as a contracts attorney, I guess what at a high level are the major differences between what you would normally do for your clients when you're building contracts or reviewing them or throwing in the technicals versus what you do for your crypto clients when it comes to contract law?
Sure. So the number one difference that a blockchain or really a crypto blockchain company is going to have is it's the problem of decentralization. I'm sure we'll talk about this later on. But, for the longest time, decentralization was not just an element. It wasn't an element of law. There was always some person whose door you could knock on. There was always someone in control, like a real entity that if something went wrong, you could hold them accountable. But the problem with decentralization is that, as you spread out these responsibilities, especially, if you're running proofs of stake, proof of work, and you have all these nodes participating in that, function, when something goes wrong, like how do you hold them accountable? Like, do you go to that specific node operator? That seems very difficult. It seems hard. And then you're going to have all your nodes sign a contract to participate. That's unreasonable. So the thing you have to do is you have to really build out a lot of disclaimers, a lot of limitations of liability, a lot of indemnity clauses to sort of counter this distributed threat. And that's sort of the knee-jerk attorney reaction. And that's how we deal with it now. But as this field develops, I think you'll see a new bodies of contract law, new contracts entirely form to handle the decentralization inherent with many crypto companies.
That's awesome. Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind when you bring that up, I'm just thinking about it now, is I believe the name is Open Law at Consensus, and they're handling a lot of basically, I think, the legal agreements between the spokes within Consensus itself on the Ethereum blockchain.
Yeah, I've met Aaron Wright a few times, who's the founder of Open Law. He also has, I'll give him a shout out, Ross Campbell, who's one of his developers. And Ross and I have communicated a fair bit about using, the smart contracts, not just for automated, workflows, but like actual legal contracts that you're backing up. And it's sort of like it's like bubbles on wallpaper. It's like as soon as you push one down, you'll find another one pops up. And then the real sort of end goal of all of this is that you want to say your smart contract or your legal contract that you coded into the blockchain or you have adjacent to your blockchain is what controls the relationship. But because blockchain coding is not reliable enough for legal, right? Because for legal reliability, you need 99.9% reliable, and no one's confident enough for that quite yet. So you'll still see paper contracts backing up these smart contracts, even with Open Law, and they'll say the paper contract is the one that controls in the event of a dispute between the two. Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember going back to college when I took one law class and it was written and then whatever's physically written on top of the printed out contract has precedence or something like that. Yeah, exactly. Conflicts clauses in contracts become very, very dicey as soon as you start saying that there's a computer code that's analogous to the paper contract.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think in your mind that something like open law, where all of these contracts are per se on the Ethereum blockchain, do you think that that's like a viable path forward? Do you think like that'll be the focus of a lot of this crypto, or do you think a lot of that still comes back to the actual lawyers having to build out all these additional indemnity clauses and contracts and everything like that?
Yeah. So that's, fundamentally, that's $1 million question. I've actually been working a lot with another company that's doing something similar, Monox, and they're under the Hyperledger umbrella, and they've been working with business workflow notation so that you can like sort of drag and drop workflows, and then it will program it into a smart contract. This way, the person who's building the contract doesn't need to know how to code themselves, because finding a competent blockchain coder by him or herself is already hard enough and already extremely expensive. Add to that you want them to have a law degree as well, and there are basically probably like 3 in the United States. I wouldn't even count myself among them. So that's always going to be a real difficult problem, and it's sort of why there's this tremendous need in law for lawyers to really understand the background of the technology they're working with. And it's sort of it's been a long simmering problem in the lawyer community that a lot of lawyers don't really know how technology works. Like there's, if you encounter some attorneys, they'll sometimes joke with you. It's like, oh, I wasn't good at math, that's why I became an attorney. But it's really not a great proposition when you're approaching these sort of complex technologies.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and that's a great segue. Let's talk a bit about payments. I know that you spend a lot of your time here with some of your clients. Give us the overview of your thoughts here and what exactly you're doing when it comes to payments and crypto.
Sure. So there are basically 3 large buckets you can put payments in. You can say, sort of like the all crypto approach is that your crypto is the payment and you're going to pay the person with it, and at no point are they ever going to convert to fiat. And then there's the other approach where it's like, okay, we're going to do the transfer of value itself with crypto, but it'll be fiat in and fiat out. And then there's the sort of much further back approach that it's just like, okay, we're just going to put a blockchain or a decentralized ledger on our back end, and like it will just be fiat through its entirety. There won't be a token in between. Most of what I focus on is the middle part, where it's fiat in to crypto to fiat out. And I think that's going to be valuable in the future. But sort of the end goal is hopefully that you create crypto that's like not tied to any government and can facilitate payments. But to do that, you run into the sort of like the 3 elements of money, which are the store of value, the account, and the unit of exchange. And so the biggest thing that crypto is going to struggle with is the store of value. You get stable coins and they're nice, but the problem is that the only sort of successful stable coin right now are ones that are pegged 1-to-1 against a fiat currency. And so, you have the people who are trying to develop algorithmic stable coins, but, that's still very, very new. And, it's not really been proved yet that will work at a broad scale. So until crypto can store value, its use as true money, I think will always sort of be a niche thing, sort of for the enthusiast, but no major institution will truly use crypto as money. They may use it as a backend to facilitate exchange, or they may use it as a unit of account, but not money.
So just to push back and play devil's advocate here, a lot of people in the space view Bitcoin as basically a store of value, and it's definitely lost the medium of exchange argument, I think, because it's just too expensive to use for, to buy a cup of coffee, to transact. But it does have Lightning being built on top of it to hopefully solve that. What in your mind would have to change for, like you said, large governments or institutions to take Bitcoin seriously as a store of value? Or do you think it won't happen?
I honestly don't think it will happen, at least not how Bitcoin is currently constituted. And the real reason is because, if the entire world flips over to Bitcoin as its predominant form of wealth, then sure, that would work. But, you need the whole world to buy in first, which I don't think would happen. And so the problem that you're going to encounter is, the fluctuations of Bitcoin itself, while, compared to some of the alts is, nothing. But like for major companies who are transacting millions of dollars and sending them halfway around the world every day, probably thousands of times a day, the risk of how much your Bitcoin was worth when you sent it versus how much it's worth once it's done doing all its confirmations is really high. And you could lose a lot of money in that interim. And so no one ever wants to take that risk, and therefore its use as a store of value is incomplete because you can't guarantee during that time frame that it will retain the value that it had.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, some people would push back and say, hey, let's use XRP and Ripple. I don't know why they would pick them, but some might say, let's use them to transact between businesses or between countries. And then if we want to hold the money ourselves, we can just hold it in Bitcoin as more of a store of value. Do you see that dichotomy between the store of value and the medium of exchange, or do you kind of view Bitcoin as both there per your argument there?
I definitely view it as both. I mean, obviously the hash power of the network, which is always in flux and can really gum up the works in terms of how quickly you can exchange Bitcoin between wallets. Really lends XRP a great advantage for its instantaneousness. Which it gains from a higher centralization, of course, which is like one of the key trade-offs. But even still, because XRP itself has its own market against the fiat currencies and and Bitcoin as well against fiat currencies, these major players who are going to transact millions and billions of dollars don't want to assume any of that. Like they already have, they're extremely risk adverse. Like if there's one of the greatest risks they actually wind up taking is the fact that they're so risk adverse, and it's why strategic acquisitions by larger companies of startups is such a powerful engine of the economy, is because it's a good symbiotic relationship of you can have all these smaller companies take the risks, and the ones that strike gold will just snap up, and then everyone will be happy. But the problem in the crypto space is that sort of dichotomy doesn't really exist, and the best you get is you say it's okay, we can have our crypto as the medium of exchange on the back end. But fundamentally, if you put in $1 million here, company, and you are paying, your manufacturer in India, well, your manufacturer in India is going to get, $1 million equivalent of rupee, but, and we will exchange it through this medium of exchange. But at all points in time, the only person who's bearing the risk of the price fluctuations is your middleman. So it's not a full disintermediation, which is, obviously a shame in this world. But by sticking the risk entirely on that middleman, both the major manufacturer and the major, company purchasing the manufactured products never bear the risk of the crypto price fluctuation.
I gotcha. Okay. So I at first thought you meant that it would be hard for Bitcoin to be a medium of exchange between companies because it's expensive. I think that's what you're saying. But to drill down on your point here, you're saying that a truly decentralized cryptocurrency would be difficult to use as medium of exchange because of the FX risk. Meanwhile, something like XRP is better suited to be an exchange currency, but it's centralized, and that kind of negates the whole argument here.
Exactly, right? It's just well, if we're going to say that our transactions can occur very quickly and reliably because we have this centralized player, then great, we'll treat them just like we treat correspondent banks in cross-border payments and say it's okay, I'll give you this money and you're going to bear the risk of it failing. And this way, if it does fail, I'll either go to my insurance or I'll look to you to make me whole. And in that case, I can turn around and tell my shareholders that no, we're not playing fast and loose with, something that's as volatile as crypto. We're, sticking the risk on someone else. And that's normally satisfactory for a shareholder.
Got it. That makes sense. So I think a lot of the narrative around Bitcoin is the digital store of value and not as much anymore, or if ever, as the medium of exchange or using it for cross-border payments. Do you think in your mind that even if Bitcoin's narrative is not to be used for, cross-border transfers, remittances, and payments, do you still think it could be successful as a store of value, even if all of that doesn't happen?
I do. I think the movements to get an ETF going with Bitcoin, and I think putting more sort of financial instruments, having Bitcoin either as an asset or tied entirely to Bitcoin, I think are good things, because Bitcoin itself as sort of the standard against which crypto internally regulates itself, right, without reference to fiat currency, I think is a strong argument. And so long as Bitcoin remains king in everyone's minds, it will be king. The thing about money is that it's actually all made up anyway, right? It's just whether or not people believe it's real. And because Bitcoin has that strong belief, I don't think that belief is going anywhere soon. Unless a 51% attack takes it down. Then as a store of value for an individual who's just like, all right, the money kept under my mattress is money that is slowly losing value because of inflation and because of the time value of money. However, if I store my money or some of my money in Bitcoin, maybe not like, I bear this risk of loss and I'm willing to accept that, but I have this tremendous upside as well. But the risk is not nearly as great as investing in something like Stellar. That's reasonable company, but not Bitcoin.
Now that makes a lot of sense. So just to sum up before we move on, is your opinion that Bitcoin it'll be very difficult for companies and corporations and governments to transact in Bitcoin due to the volatility and due to the FX risk and due to the costs? But on the flip side, you still think it's a good store of value for individuals themselves? Yeah,
I think if your primary goal is I want to park money somewhere for a little bit, I think using Bitcoin for that purpose, even as it's presently constituted today, is a decent use of it. If you want to say I want 10% of my 401k to be in Bitcoin, right? I think that's a great use case. I think that's you at the very least, you would not be called stupid for doing that. But in my opinion, it seems like an intelligent diversification of your asset portfolio. But if you're saying okay, we're going to use Bitcoin as a reliable store of value over time, where it's we want the value to neither go up nor go down, then I think it's fundamentally flawed for that purpose.
Gotcha. So let's move on to some of the other fun stuff you're doing right now. You do a lot, and you told me about these blockchain-based LLCs, which I thought were super interesting. And we recently released a report on DAOs, so there's some overlap there. Tell us what you're doing with this and where you're doing it.
Sure. So this is definitely the thing I've been most excited about overall. Presently, Vermont is the only state in the union that allows them. And what a blockchain-based LLC is it's the half step to a DAO. But in going only the half step, you then get limited liability protection for all the participants in the DAO, which is a huge problem. DAOs, as they're presently constituted, everyone would be considered a general partner. And the legal liability associated with being a general partner means that if the DAO does something illegal or wrong and it causes another party loss, then they can come after you personally to repay it. So they can seize your house, they can seize your car to repay that person who lost money. And there's no way around that presently with the DAO. However, with the BBLLC, you get the limited liability protection of an LLC, so they can only seize the assets of the DAO effectively. But what makes it great from Vermont's perspective is you come up with your operating agreement, which is the standard agreement you use for an LLC. And then you just specify a few other things. You specify how public or private your blockchain is going to be, what some of its base protocols are, what you're going to do in the event of a security incident, and a few other things. And then you can run your entire business operation on the blockchain. And what this means, what opportunities this opens up is if you were to run an organization that had 1,000 owners and maybe 5 employees, the amount of legal and accounting work that would have to go behind that to make that run makes it administratively infeasible. These organizations largely don't exist because it's too expensive to run them. However, if you can say it's okay, we're putting all our governance on a blockchain, then the administrative efficiencies you gain, because now you have a single source of truth. You have an instantly auditable record of how everyone voted, who the members are, when they became members, what's their percent ownership interest, were they distributed any money? If so, how much? And you can have this instant record always available and instantly queryable. And therefore, you don't need like a full-time lawyer and a full-time accountant to make it run. You just need a blockchain. And then the other exciting things that these open up are the ability to tokenize the various aspects of an organization. So you can say, it's like, okay, only some of these owners are going to have a right to this income stream. And we're going to say that whoever holds these specific tokens has that right, and they'll automatically be given those funds. Or you can say, let's say your organization, it's a bunch of freelancers, right? So you have 1,000 freelancers who are pulling their resources to, share office space, share expenses. And so they maintain office space in like 4 cities in the United States, and they have leases for them. So they can appoint a committee, and they can say, committee, you are in charge of all of our leasing. And who is on this committee? The holders of that token. And the holders of that token are the people who vote to approve or reject leases, and they're given that authority. So in terms of just the overall governance of a large organization, it's far more efficient to do it with the blockchain. And now with these BBLCs that you can do, there's a legal framework to do it under, and you avoid the whole general partner problem inherent in all DAOs.
That's super interesting, and that's extremely exciting that there's actually a state that's allowing this and kind of innovating on it. So it sounds like this is more for real physical institutions and corporations and ownership here. I want to segue these blockchain-based LLCs to kind of the crypto connection here, just so we could understand this a little better. So like Moloch DAO is a DAO built on Ethereum where all of the funders, quote unquote, donate, 1,000 ETH or 100 ETH, and they could basically vote on how they want those funds to be spent. Now, my question for you regarding limited liability is, I guess I could donate Ethereum to Moloch DAO from any address, and no one will really know it's mine. God forbid Moloch DAO funds a terrorist unit in Iraq or something, and all the partners are now liable. Don't I already have limited liability protection because nobody knows where I donated the money from?
Yeah, but relying on limited protection because you presumably can't be found is a dicey proposition. I mean, it's something that's done in normal business land too. There are plenty of times where you try to sue someone and they skip town. It's a problem that's existed. The Old West, that's why you got those wanted posters most of the time, is like someone tried to sue someone else and that person just ran away. So it's like not great to rely on, but to the larger point as well, increasingly government is very good at tracking crypto, because it used to be, it's like, you transacted in Bitcoin, it was totally anonymous because there's no way to tie a wallet address to a human being fundamentally, and that's still true. There's no reason that because you have a wallet address you can therefore find out the person who authorized that specific payment. However, a determined adversary, or, in the case that you cite, right, funding a terrorist unit is obviously like a huge no-no in terms of government. And so it's likely that the US government would put, a substantial amount of resources into figuring out, it's like, all right, who are the people who made this possible? And they would seek to try you. And, I think as attorneys, we're all looking forward to the court case that will establish the standard of proof required to tie a human being to their wallet. Because that's going to be a court case at some point in time for some reason. We as lawyers await the day. Yeah,
no, that's huge. So we have that crypto example. Let's go back to the physical world example here. Let's say, for your example, that 1,000 freelance artists want to buy a building and they all want to live in there and work and do amazing artwork. How hard would the process be to do this without the blockchain-based LLCs versus what do they gain out of doing it with the blockchain-based LLCs? Like, normally, would only the main owner artist have voting rights over the building, or do they get the limited liability protection too, where they normally don't? What do they get and what do they not get?
Sure. So the biggest thing that they get is transparency and efficiency, and I'll unpack these. Right now, establishing 1,000 member limited liability company is an enormous amount of legal paperwork. So it probably wouldn't happen in the first place. But let's just, for the sake of argument, say it did. What you could do in this LLC is you could say it's a manager managed LLC. So you have like a board of managers. And so, maybe you have like 5 or 6 people and they're the ones who are really reviewing this stuff. And now we're saying they're artists. So we'll go with stereotypes and assume that they're a rather independent bunch. And so at the end of the day, they're going to insist that, management can work out all the deals, but fundamentally everyone must vote on it to approve it. And so what that means is that you have to reliably get together 1,000 people and have them vote. And, sort of the same problem of wallet addresses to people. Like if they're not physically in the room voting, it's like, how do you know that email that they sent was their actual vote? In standard corporation land, there are like proxy votes, right? You can say it's like this person can have my vote, but that's again like a lot of legal paperwork to make those sort of things happen, and it's what's made it administratively infeasible up till now. And then in terms of the person who is selling the building or is leasing the building, whether they're dealing with the standard LLC or a BBLLC, they would interface with it the same way. Like they wouldn't need to have their own blockchain to like interoperate with them. Like, you would still have like a paper contract backing this up. It's just the internals of your organization and how it got approved are now on a blockchain rather than a bunch of paperwork. So what they're gaining is, if you say like, okay, our BBLC has a board of managers who are in charge of ensuring the, code stability of our blockchain, but, and like maybe they have some other rights as well. That's going to be their fundamental task. And what they can say is just like, okay, like organization, we negotiated with the seller, and we have this deal to purchase this property. Here it is. We need your vote, in 5 days' time. And so the 5-day timer is a smart contract. The vote gets put out to everyone by email, and they can click a button. They can click yes, no, abstain. And when they click that button, it will be registered on the blockchain as an activity taken by that person. And that person is going to represent and warrant that, their email is like the address that you give them a vote to. And this way you can tally the votes. You can see every time or where each person voted at what time and how they did it. And you can know that they received the appropriate paperwork because the paperwork comes with the right to vote. So by doing it that way, you save, one, it becomes very transparent about how this process took place because anyone can query the blockchain. And then two, the efficiency of it, of not having a lot of sophisticated service providers like accountants, like attorneys, as the middlemen between the owner, the management board, and the abstract entity called the company. By disintermediating those, you no longer have to pay them. And as all attorneys will tell you, we're very expensive. So getting rid of that huge expense really, I think, will make it possible.
That's super, super interesting. And a lot of people would say, why don't we just do this on centralized AWS? And the first couple of things that come to mind is basically what you just brought up, is that any one of these LLC or token holders that have governance rights here could, basically view the entire smart contract, who voted how, what the results were in real time, where you can't do that in a centralized way.
Yeah, one of my favorite jokes is the cloud is just someone else's computer, right? And if you are trusting like your entire corporate documentation, your entire corporate apparatus, and now you're trusting the corporate process as well to someone else's computer, you are fully at their mercy. Like you're never going to negotiate against them because they know they have you over a barrel. If anything bad happens on their end, it's happening to you. And on top of that, you can't, if you're the company and you want to encourage new membership, new owners, you want to grow, you want to expand, having that liability just always out there, and you always are going to have to disclose it. You're always going to have to face that reality, whether or not something bad is currently happening. Really, it goes a long way to defeating the purpose.
That makes a ton of sense. So let's zoom way out and let's get to some high level macro questions for you. They might be faster or shorter. I'm not sure yet. I think an overall trend in America is we're kind of seeing the government put out either vague or no advice to companies or no laws or regulations. And in my opinion, it's pushing a lot of these companies away. Like Binance has to follow rules potentially in 180 countries, but potentially they don't have to in any because I think they're in Malta at this point. What's your take on, is America leading the way here, or are they pushing companies away? And some recent news was Poloniex had to geofence basically all of their U.S. customers. Binance is doing the same, I believe. What's your take here on America's lead?
Yeah. So, the party line, which I largely agree with, is that America is absolutely falling behind in terms of adoption, regulation, and clear advice. I mean, really, for a solid year and, really even to this day, all that would happen is people would be like, oh, the chairman of the SEC made a statement while talking to this group of people. And then, another commissioner made a statement over here, you're trying to compile these statements to come up with a framework to run your business. And that's insane. That's not legally feasible. We talked earlier about, needing 99.9% legal reliability to do things. Relying on just what someone said one time is not enough, right? You need official statements, and you need laws. Whether that comes in the form of new statutes or just reinterpretive regulation or court cases, it doesn't matter. You need something firm that you can hang your hat on. On one hand, I sort of understand the SEC is obviously the biggest perpetrator here. I mean, the Commodities Exchange Commission has done a little bit better job, but I understand their hesitancy. It's like America is supreme in terms of the securities market, and why it's because, after the Great Depression, we had Joe Kennedy come make the SEC what it is today, and its statutory framework is they say it's the envy of the world. I've only heard this from U.S. regulators, though, so we'll take it with a grain of salt. And so they don't want to give up that position by changing these decades old laws based on Granted, Bitcoin's been around for a little bit, but it's only really been in the fore for the past 3-4 years. So I get that hesitation, but to your point, it's a major discouragement to innovation. There's no safe harbor. There's no okay, companies, you can try to build this out. I had one client who I had some good talks with the SEC. We actually reached out to them. And we had a productive dialogue, but that productive dialogue didn't result in anything more substantial than it's okay, company, you can continue doing what you're doing, but not more. And for a startup company, the but not more, it's what's the point? So I am very concerned about that. I will say on a brighter note, the states have actually done a great job. I've been very enthused by state governments. Vermont has these BBLLCs, but Wyoming is obviously a big one now due to Caitlin Long's involvement there. Delaware, unfortunately, will be stymied for a while because of their registered agent lobby, but they're trying. And Illinois is taking a big lead in terms of putting governmental processes on blockchains in terms of encouraging innovation in the space. And granted, they can't, the SEC can always come in and preempt them when it comes to crypto, but you can create a lot of good foundations for companies to grow once the SEC, does the right thing.
That's excellent color. So let's talk about, where do you think the government has the most teeth here? And I'm sure it matters on a case by case basis, but let's say that the government comes out, the US government, and they're not about crypto. We don't really like this. Let's regulate it. Let's attack people for this. Do you think they're going to go after and, shut down centralized exchanges? Do you think the IRS is going to go after people for taxes? where does the government have the most teeth?
Yeah, so the tax question is kind of sad because the IRS, due to political reasons over the past 10 years, has been ridiculously underfunded. So they just really don't have the resources to pursue this at scale. I worked for the Office of the Chief Counsel of the IRS for a time, and we had to pool money to buy the office coffee every day. And that was back in 2013. So it's only gotten worse, I've heard. So it's a bit unfortunate there. The SEC, they've been sending out subpoenas left and right, catching up with the ICO boom of 2017, which should tell you exactly where they're at on all of this. So really, I think the biggest thing, the biggest teeth-bearing element of the government right now is not so much that they'll actually take action against you, but the threat they'll take action against you. Because of governmental uncertainty, they can be behind the ball by 7 years. And it wouldn't matter because if you're a company and you're saying all right, we want to move forward with this crypto initiative, this blockchain initiative, this payments initiative, you're going to need buy-in from customers. Maybe you have investors and your own team and their own security, and they're going to want to know that they're not going to invest all this money and all this time only for 5 years later, the government agency to finally get to you and then shut you down. So because that threat is just ever present and it's sort of, there are known knowns, known unknowns, which is risk, and unknown unknowns, which is uncertainty. And it's really just a heap of risk and uncertainty that, is typically too much for a business to tolerate.
That's excellent color. And one quick question building on that. Do you think that the large, potentially fraudulent companies, I have my own opinions here, let's say Tron or Ripple, do you think the government's going to go after them first? Who do you think are the low-hanging fruit? And I know you mentioned the ICOs. I'm just not sure if it's projects, people, or protocols here.
That's a great question. The low-hanging fruit is going to be a mix of how prominent they were. The government in these sort of cases loves to take down, what's Tron's CEO's name?
Justin Sun.
Yeah, right. He's always out there. He's always at the fore. People know who he is. So, he's putting a big target on himself, right? Lucky Luciano never really faced government prosecution the way Al Capone did because Lucky Luciano wasn't, going out to the media every day, but Al Capone was. So government loves sort of those sort of targets. But in terms of the actual, the fraudulent vehicles, again, the decentralized element of this is going to always make that difficult, but they're going to go after the choke points. And that's why I think you see the government focusing so much on exchanges.
That makes a lot of sense. And the topic of the hour is always Facebook Libra recently. We have a research report going out on it soon, so I'll let people, parse the details along there. But sticking with your expertise here, what's your take on, I guess the highest level question is, does the U.S. government view Libra as a threat to its monetary policy and its dominance in the U.S. dollar?
If it does, they won't really feel that for a little bit. I think the big problem with Facebook and Libra is that, Facebook, for all of its problems, has been a successful tech company. No doubt about that. And they've sort of been stereotypical in how they've been a successful tech company, disrupt this, right? And frenetic growth and, sort of this market dominance in a brand new market. That's all well and good. The problem with Libra is that, with all of its sort of payments functionalities and its store of value functionalities, and it's being controlled by a centralized institution, you've kind of made a bank. And the problem with making a bank is, banking has been a regulated industry since, the Medici. So there's just a boatload of administrative burdens that, tech companies, by and large have been very bad at adapting to, right? You have the fintech startups and they're all well and good, right? But they ultimately get bought by JP Morgan, by, Citigroup, right? And they get integrated into their compliance and sort of these other large scale administrative tasks that banks do. And I personally, for all of Facebook's wealth, I just think in terms of like resources of technical know-how and available talent, that they're not about to turn around and make themselves into a fully regulated bank. And I think that's all. Like, if the government ever was truly threatened by Libra, all they would have to do is implement banking regulations on Facebook. And if they don't, and they might not just kill Libra, they'd kill Facebook.
Yeah, no, that's excellent color. And that's zoomed out. And a lot of people don't focus on that high level view. So it's super interesting. Do you think that Facebook will even be able to launch this? Like, do you think that they'll pass like all these congressional hearings and everything and get to the point where they're stumbling around trying to build a bank? Or do you think it won't even get to that point?
Yeah, I'll stake a position on this. I don't think it will get to that point. I think they will encounter enough headaches and roadblocks along the way that, if it ever does come out, it's going to be, a whimper in comparison to the promises they're making right now, just because, even if Facebook were a more reputable company, I think they would encounter problems. But especially, and we're not going to get to it in this podcast, which is unfortunate. The privacy issues around blockchain are enormous. You have an immutable record, so like if you put in bad information, there's no way to scrub it, other than to burn it, which is a thing and another conversation. But because Facebook has routinely flouted regulators, has and had this attitude about it, and now in the public perception, they're not trustworthy. I think, lawmakers, on top of doing their regular duties of sort of enforcing these controls, we'll see the public spectacle element of it as a way to gin up support among their voters, and just take Facebook to task.
No, I respect that opinion, and that's super interesting. So, Kurt, just closing out, tell us where people could find out more about you, and tell us who are the best types of clients that should reach out to you.
Sure. Thank you. So the best way to reach out to me is Kurt, Kurt, at mgmiller.legal. So mgmiller.legal. And we also have an Instagram, mgmillerip. And in terms of the best clients for me, really, it's sort of, in terms of the legal work I do, most of it is very traditional. If you've got a company and you're trying to grow, you're trying to get investors, you're trying to sell your work, you're trying to sell your services, I'm the lawyer you come to. And then my business partner, he writes all the patents, trademarks, and copyrights for these companies. So together we form a pretty good unit for a tech company, growing tech company.
It's a good team. I like that. Well, Kurt, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, everyone. If you enjoyed listening to the episode, please share it on Twitter and LinkedIn and give us a 5-star rating in the iTunes store.